two things are actually pretty easy. Working with colors and creating color gradients, something that's a little bit different than adding solid colors. Another, sometimes we actually need to knock out the center of an object so that it's transparent or it's an object we can see through, kind of like punching a hole in a donut. Let's give that a try in today's lesson. We'll be applying those two processes in today's lesson by starting off with importing images into Gravit Designer. Specifically importing our logo sketches and logo designs. We can start this off by going to Print and US Letter. Simply picking an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Now we usually start off with the fundamentals, and the fundamentals really are going to be about naming our page first, now we already have some sketches completed. The thing that we want to do here is to take our sketches, bring them into our digital sheet of paper, and then lock that layer into place so we don't actually click, drag, and move it out of place on accident. That process is here, where we will simply place an image. And here are a couple of different versions. We actually have a hand-sketched pencil version, and then we also have a digitally hand-sketched version from Jamboard. We can bring either one of those designs in. Let's start with the normal hand sketch on paper. Perfect. As soon as I apply this into my layout, the first thing we want to do is name this layer. Try to make it a good habit to name every single layer. It'll keep you from being really confused once you end up with 50, 25, 100, or even several hundred layers. We'll call this layer Pencil Sketch. And then we'll lock this layer so we don't accidentally, as we begin trying to trace over it, knock it out of its position. In other words, we don't want to accidentally think that we're using one of our pen tools and do a click and drag and move it out of place. We'll lock this layer, but still keep it visible. Perfect. Makes it a lot easier for us to trace. But nothing stops us from really importing the digital sketch as well. However, just on its own layer. We can make this bigger. The goal really is to let you know you don't have to fit the entire width, especially if it's an entire screenshot of an entire window. Scale it up. That way you have the ability to trace a larger image. It's already labeled Jamboard. I'll still call it Jamboard Sketch. Then I would lock this layer. I could also hide both of the layers by simply clicking on the eye icon. And I'll bring the pencil sketch back. So here I have a couple of concepts for us to try out and see how they work. First, let me zoom in. And I'll hold down the space bar so I can click and drag my object. Whenever you're tracing, it's a really good habit to get used to. Zoom in as much as possible so you can get as close as possible to your digital design. Select the pen tool, and we'll do some very fundamental things. I never had to worry about the pencil sketch being not completely accurate, because digitally we can make all the changes that we want. We'll go ahead and give it a save. After receiving that warning, naming the file at the bottom of the screen, and clicking save. And we can pick up where we left off. Using the selection arrow tool first to select the object we want to continue editing, then we go back to the pen tool to select that object. And now I'd like a curved line here. So I'll start, think of this as like the letter D. Curves around, and my straight line from here to here makes a little letter D shape. Then I'll click and drag, and just get it to match as nicely as possible. And I'll still take advantage of my next line actually being a curve. Now a straight line. Here I'll make the letter D by dragging. And now I want a straight line again, so this curved line won't do me any good. I click back on the anchor point where I started. It turns into an aqua color. And now I'm back to a straight line. We'll continue our edit. Now I'd like the letter D. Drag. And this sometimes takes some getting used to figure out which direction is best to drag into. Straight line, in order to keep them aligned. I'll create my straight line about here. In order to match my very irregular letter T, I'm going to click all the way on the other end so I can drag and make a much larger letter D. And I can clean up any of these anchor points and lines later. Don't want a curved line. And I'll go all the way back to where I started in order to make the top of my letter T curved, but I have to remember, even when I'm clicking back where I started, I want to click and drag in order to curve the top. Pretty decent. And I can even hide my pencil sketch layer to see what this looks like digitally. Switch to the select tool, click away, and now hide the pencil sketch. The letter is looking clean and sharp and professional already. Just make sure that you remember to continue to save. In the top right corner, I can see that my logo is saving. Okay, now that we have an object, and we can bring the pencil sketch back anytime we want by simply unhiding it, here are a couple concepts that we're going to go through today. We know how to change colors. We have an object selected, and then we scroll down on the right side to fills. Do a single click. Changing a color is really easy. We can even use the picker to figure out what color we want to sample and use that in our layout as well. And of course, it doesn't work anywhere outside of your sheet of paper or your artboard or canvas. And I'll select on the line, which is actually black. Even that's possible. We'll go back to a solid color. Here's another option that's really cool. First, I'll change the color of the letter T to black. And with the pointer tool selected, remember the goal of the pointer tool is so that you can select objects, multiple objects, and scale and size your objects to different sizes. Grab the object, Control C on my keyboard to copy, and then I'll click away so that nothing is selected. I'm deselecting. Control V on my keyboard to paste. And now I have two objects. But we're going to do something pretty cool with the first one, or the second one and the newer one that's on top. Click the Fill tool, and we can change the fill type at the bottom or at the top of this menu. We'll go to Linear Gradient. Gradient meaning fading from one color to another, and linear meaning in a straight line. We can actually take these points and move the direction of our gradient or our fade so that it comes from any direction that we like. With this point selected, or this point on the right here, then there's this point on the left here. Change one color to red. Click at the top and change the black. To more of a yellow. Creating a really cool gradient effect. Let's brighten that up. Perfect. So it's a real cool and easy way to do a nice gradient or fade. And then of course we can take the border that goes around the letter and make it even thicker by simply pressing the up and down arrow keys and give it a really cool graffiti effect. Now sometimes you run into a situation where your name may be something like Bob or Dave. And in that case, we're going to get into our second part of this lesson. Let's just say that your name is Bob and it starts with a B. Okay, so this is the outline of the letter B. But in order to make it look like a capital B, we actually need to apply like some little letter D's on the inside. So let's do that. First, let's take the letter B, give it a fill color. Any color doesn't matter at this point based on what we're about to do. Now let's create two letter D's. And I'm going to go exactly back to where I started, but drag to make letter D's. So the first object is complete. Let's actually change the color of that object and create our second one. And let's change the color of that one to another color. Okay, perfect. So we kind of run into this situation where we would really like to be able to see through this letter B so we can see our white sheet of paper straight through it, but we can't. We've basically just layered one object with two other objects laid on top. but we'd like to actually cut the middle of the letter B out. We'll select the objects, all three of them, and then we'll go to the top. And we have this option called Create Compound Shape. If we click it now, it's going to take all three of our shapes and combine them into one, and that's not what we want. Control Z to undo. Instead, there's a little arrow, and whenever you see this little arrow in pretty much any software program, it usually lets you know that this tool has a sub-select or a subset of tools that you can use. Let's click here. Union. That's not what we want, but that's exactly what we did. Takes multiple shapes and unite them together into one. Then there's subtract. You can see in this example here, we take two opposite shapes and we subtract where they overlap, creating this bite in this cookie. There's intersect. So the intersect gives us the ability to mask out or hide different parts of an image. And then there's difference. And we can see in this model that the difference sort of selects the voided areas where the images overlap to show the differences where they exist. In our case, we can do intersect, and that works out really good, especially because we made sure that our objects are different colors. If they were the same color, it'd be a little bit more challenging. Or subtract. I think we'll go with subtract. So let's click subtract, and now we can see the color of our objects changed to white. Or we'll select our object, hover it slightly off of the artboard, and we can see that we can see through our object. And we could also do the same by placing it on top of another object. And we can see through the center. So for those of you that have letters in your name, like the letter E, the letter D, B, the letter O, and so on, where you need to knock the center of your letters out in order to see through them so they're transparent, you're going to need two different objects layered one on top of the other. So let's do that again. But in this case, we'll use some real simple shapes, like circles. These ellipses or circles, we'll draw one that's one color. We'll draw a second one, and then change the color of that. That just makes it easier for us to see. Change the fill color. The color doesn't matter. We just want to make sure that the color is different than the other object color shape. Click on the gray object and the purple object, and go to subtract. Now we have a completely new object, and we test it out by hovering it over. Perfect. We're able to see straight through that letter O. So in this really short lesson, the goal was really to learn how to bring images into Gravit Designer and lock those layers. That way we can trace over them. How can we apply a gradient color field so we have a much more dynamic color field than solid colors? How we can increase the stroke or the border around objects or hand-drawn letters. And then of course, how to knock out the center of an object using the subtract tool. Catch you in the next one.